The Table, brought to you by the Long Steel Rail Press. If you would like to buy me a cup of coffee, you can do that at the link below, or you can go to thethreadinthequilt.com and support my work there. Chapter 2, Before New York City. When I posted Chapter 1 on my blog, a person who I had been chatting with on Facebook showed an interest in this story. She called herself a red diaper baby. A red diaper baby is a kid raised by political activists, and I suspect I am one of those. She also mentioned that she thought the blog post showed moral courage. I asked her what she meant by that, and she said it was courageous to be openly talking about mental health issues. We chatted a bit, and somewhere in the digital exchange, I mentioned my wife. I always mention my wife, especially if I'm chatting over the internet with a woman. I also mentioned my mother. Thusly, the red diaper comment. My mother was my rock and moral compass. I told her that my mother was a political activist. My Facebook friend wanted to hear more about my mom, Glenda the Good Witch. My mother was the reason I ended up in the care of Central State Mental Hospital on a 3-day self-imposed mental inquest warrant and property of the state of Kentucky. I freaked out. I yelled at her and accused her of brandishing a weapon. I left the house. I guess you could say I ran away to the loony bin by the way of a teepee. I'd been living in her basement for a year, slowly slipping into a deep, dark depression. I was suffering from the breakup of a 2-year relationship. My life was collapsing. My girlfriend, who I had met at the food cooperative where I was working several months before, cheated on me with a friend in our circle. I was also suffering heart problems. My heart was skipping beats. Panic attacks were a daily event. Every day I walked across the park, that was my 46-acre front yard as a child, and went to the store to buy tons of junk food. I ate tons of sugar, tons of salt, and then went home and slept for hours. My body was rebelling. I was getting fat and more in my head. I was reading and listening to music, sleeping for hours on end, sometimes upwards of 18. I was reading the Sufi books that I had been turned on to by the manager of the food cooperative. I was reading Black Elk Speaks and a book with speeches from the Native American chiefs called Touch the Earth. I was a young hippie, deadhead. The medicine man manager at the co-op, the Teepee Connection, had turned me on to a Sufi guru from Philadelphia named Bawa Mahayadeen. I was deeply getting into Sun Ra that he had turned me on to. I was listening to Sun Ra and reading all his poetry on the CD covers and starting an impressive Sun Ra collection. Bawa's books are deep. The idea of killing myself was on my mind, but not that kind of killing. I was deeply thinking about who I was. My friendship with my long-haired hippie herbal Sufi manager was deep. He is a very humble person and was always saying something that I thought was something I needed to think about. Sun Ra, well, if you ain't ever heard of Sun Ra, best be firing up that Google machine. My little trip up the river of life was starting to come to a delta. All my problems seemed to be rushing in on me. Over the course of 8 months, I had gained 100 pounds. Something was going to break. One morning, after one of those long, dark days and nights in the basement, I had a crazy audible hallucination. I thought I heard my mother run through the house and get her .38 and pull the trigger back. I ran up the basement steps and told her that I had had enough. Then after a short freak out, I left. She would not let me come back. She had had enough and didn't know what to do. I'm sure she was hurt, terrified and lost as to why her little Johnny was so sick in the head. I didn't have a plan as to what I was going to do. I was ready for some help. Several of my friends were on the crazy check. I knew that was an option. However, I didn't think that I was that kind of a crazy, so I phoned a friend. The friend owned a delightful home out in the south end of Louisville, had a nice family who were then celebrating Thanksgiving. He drove all the way across town and picked me up from the Walgreens drugstore where I had called him from a payphone. I stayed in his backyard teepee overnight. He built a fire. I had a big plate of food. We talked about me being nuts, and then, after a long night rearranging all the dirt, sticks, and staring at the fire burn, I knew I needed help. I was not going to get this crazy out. I got a ride downtown and somehow ended up getting ready to have the meeting with the woman who handed out the gum at the co-op. She was the mother of the young woman who set up that table on Christopher Street that you were reading about a minute ago.